good with those three topics, really?
I don't remember anything happening during the week.
It's fine. Just delete that part about miscellaneous.
The only thing would have been people complaining about the OpTic hosting champs. That was... I'm trying to go through Crone's Twitter to see if he had posted anything.
No. I mean, I get the argument. I think people, like, freaking out about it was a little over the top. I get the argument that it should be a neutral event, but if the CDL is literally, like, an organization needs to host it and OpTic was just the org to step up and do it, like, you can't say anything about that. You can say that, yeah, sure, the Activision should be hosting champs on their own, but here we are, so.
I mean, it's like you said, it's kind of a deeper thing than people want to realize. It's like it's not a conspiracy to help OpTic. OpTic,
yeah,
they don't need any help, I don't think. You ready to get started? Or did you tweet it already?
Just doing it right now. Okay. Gotta get the YouTube isn't showing up for me. When I go to live, it doesn't show up, but when I go to home, it does. That's weird.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're good.
Let me retweet it real quick.
You can read Scump's lips so easily in that, and I just love it.
What'd you say?
In like the GIF, you can read Scump's lips so easily when he's saying that when they're fucking. So that's from the Huntsmen when they played their first match against the Empire. A little ironically against Shotzi.
Yeah. I don't think he has the same feelings about Shotzi now.
I think that was mostly directed towards Krim.
Probably.
And potentially a little Clay.
Yeah. Scump has been with literally every iteration of OpTic that he was a teammate of each of those 5 players on the Empire at different times.
That is
Hook last season, Illy.
Well, it was literally one game with Hook.
Yeah.
And he played in the game where it was before they got ghosty.
Yeah.
So it was Hook, Shotzi, Dashy, and Scump was on it. So Scump was on the AR and he like turned on methods on Hotel.
Yeah. Rest in peace, Methods.
One of the Methods last matches too. We are most likely going to get a squid sighting on stream too, because my parents are in Atlantic City for their anniversary, and I left my door open because I could hear her just running around and stuff, and I didn't want her like clawing the closed door, so don't get spooked if she jumps up behind me.
I'm expecting it now. Are you ready to get started?
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to episode 128 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're going to reassess Kenny's all-time ranking after last week's episode. After, we've got a week to kind of decompress, to reassess what's been happening over the past few weeks in the Call of Duty landscape. And now we can talk about possibly one of the 10 best Call of Duty players ever. We also have the Esports World Cup. It's coming up, and we'll talk about that. And part of that is maybe the death of the New York Subliners. The brand that we've got to know over the last 4 to 5 years seems to be going away, and we'll talk about that near the end of this show. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. One of the best times in baseball right now with trade deadline coming up in less than 20 hours now tomorrow. So, exciting time in sports world. And, we're kind of in the like pseudo off season right now for COD just because of the Esports World Cup. So it's not the full blown roster mania, but we got a few roster changes to talk about ahead of the tournament later in August. So it should be a fun episode. I'm ready to hop in.
What would you think about a CDL trade deadline? Obviously, we have roster mania, and we kind of get a little taste every post tournament, and then obviously in the off season. But if there was an actual middle of the season, we have a little break, and this is the time to make trades, maybe more of a transfer window, like in soccer.
I feel like it would have to be I mean, there is roster lock.
Yeah.
I don't think it's like very public when that is, and usually you only get a sense of it if like the players are tweeting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
A trade deadline wouldn't do much in the CDL just because trades are so far and few between. And I mean, literally the last trade I can remember is gunless for Clay. What was that in an IW?
Yes.
There really aren't very many
7 years ago.
There really aren't very many player for player trades in COD, and that's really a contract thing. That's just COD hasn't gotten to that point yet. So maybe someday down the line when we're 20 years into the Ego Chall podcast, we'll be talking about a trade deadline, and I don't expect that to be anything coming up soon though.
Yeah, it's also there are just so few players that they're really, most teams are only keeping 4 players on their roster, and then their substitute spot is filled by a coach who's not a player. So they don't really have much. Like if the Yankees, like they traded for Chaz Chisholm this week, I mean they have to trade prospects to get a player like that. Whereas in the CDL, you're just giving up money. So it's more like soccer in that way. But I think it could be interesting down the line. Obviously, you have to get a little more stability before you start introducing these very chaotic things into a sports league like the CDL. But let's talk about Kenny real quick, because this was something that you put in the notes and you had said last week. I think I just like offhandedly mentioned like, where is he all time? Because he and Shotzi, as part of OpTic Texas, they win the 2024 CDL championship. Those 2 players in particular now have 2 world championship rings under their belts, whereas Pred and Dash each have 1. But Kenny specifically, he's been in 4 champs grand finals. He's won 2. He has been a very impactful player pretty much since he turned 18, and he joined up with TK. I believe that was in World War II. So where are you now after a week? Where are you now with the Kenny all-time kind of ranking discussion?
Yeah, so the reason I wanted to just, at least touch on this episode is because, you posted a snippet from the last episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel. If you guys aren't following the YouTube channel or subscribe to it, go check out Ego Chall Podcast on YouTube. But now it's only a 9-minute segment of our last like hour and a half video for the podcast, and it's our 3rd most viewed video on the channel. So did really well, and that was kind of like a spur of the moment conversation. We weren't really planning on talking about that. At least I wasn't. Maybe you were in the back of your head, but I wasn't really like fully prepared for that, and I wasn't like I rattled off some names like of people who had 2 rings. I even for some reason I was grouping Slasher in with people who have 2 rings just because
Close.
Slasher is he's got 1 ring, but he's got a lot of championships, and I think that's what I was kind of mixing up. And he's also been one of those players who's been like a fringe 9, 10, 11, 12 guy in a lot of top 10 lists over the years. And I think that's probably changing now as more people are getting these 2 rings. But yeah, I think the big thing for me now is after having that initial conversation, I wasn't like fully prepared to put Kenny in a top 10 just because I wasn't looking at actual numbers. And one thing I did say was that I felt like just because of the era of when Kenny came into play and the difference in the scheduling and all that stuff, he wasn't going to have as many overall championships as some of these other players, but it turns out if you look at the winningest players on COD Esports Wiki, he's actually ninth all time for COD major tournament wins with 10. He's tied with JCap and Octane at 10. He's also tied with Simp and Abizi at 10. All of Kenny's are on land though, and Abizi and Simp have 3 online. I'm assuming those are like home series and stuff during the COVID era and whatnot. So that's very interesting to take into consideration, and obviously I felt like that was, enough. Those are 3 or 4 names right there: JCap, Octane, Simp and Abizi. Certainly, you Octane probably falls into that conversation with Slasher for someone with like 1 ring who might be like a fringe top 10 guy, especially now with more people having 2 rings and whatnot. But those other guys all have multiple rings, and now Kenny is tied with them in overall championships, and I think that certainly has to elevate him into the top 10 conversation. And I think that was just the biggest thing for me is I wasn't actually, thinking he had 10 overall major championships. I know obviously he comes into the league after, he starts out in AW, age restriction comes into effect. He has to wait a couple years, storms back into the scene in World War II with Team Caliber winning those back-to-back events to start the year. So I knew he had 2 from there. But I really didn't I don't know. I just, even off the top of my head right now, I can't really think of like, I'll say 6 other championships he won outside of like the 2 COD champs. He had a bunch of success with LA Thieves, and obviously I'm assuming that's where most of those other ones are coming from. But just the number 10 there and having him tied with Octane, JCap, Simp, and Abizi in overall championships was kind of surprising to me. But I think especially, there are so many people ready, and you and I might fall into the camp too of people who are ready to getting close to being ready to elevate Simp and Abizi even higher into the top 10 conversation. Like it's kind of been a thing where it seems like it's only a matter of time before they're
They've been
in
teasing
that top
us.
5. Yeah, especially if they get a 3rd ring, then it's going to be a really interesting conversation. But now, looking at those numbers and seeing where Kenny's at, definitely, I felt like just after the conversation we had last weekend, I was speaking a little more generally without this information, and I felt like it was important to give him some due respect. Not that I disrespected him or anything by not like saying he's definitely top 10, but I think now, especially without actually doing a top 10 list right here and right now, I think he's definitely got the numbers to support a case for that.
Yeah, I wasn't when we did the initial segment, I just hadn't like the question of like where does this put them? Not necessarily like specifically, but like essentially do they deserve to be in that conversation with some of the people that we consider all-time greats? Like someone like JCap, who I think has taken a lot of flack over the years because we kind of remember him at the end of his career where he wasn't the same type of player. He wasn't like the skilled player, arguably I think considered almost undoubtedly the best like Black Ops 1 player, one of the best Modern Warfare 3 players. He was part of like 3 of the first 4 champs grand finals. Like that type of player was not like he wasn't that at the end of his career. And I think sometimes we judge players based on the end rather than, what we really should be is like the peak and the longevity. Kind of same deal with Aches because Aches probably stuck around a little bit too long and we didn't get to see him at his best at the end. But going back to Kenny, I just looked through some of his wins. So he won a few with 100 Thieves, a few with TK, a few with LAT. He won a few obviously with OpTic Texas. Now he won champs this year and a major this year. So he's been pretty consistent. It's been like 2 or 3 per year, other than OGLA. Rest in peace. That was not the best or most successful stint in his career, but he's obviously. I wrote down 14 names that I think are in consideration for top 10. No specific order. Obviously, some of these are like dead, certain to be top 10. But the 14 names, Aches, Clayster, Crimsix, Karma, Simp, Celium, Abizi, Kenny, JCap, Shotzi, Scump, Octane, TP, and Slasher. So those are 14 players, all of which have won world championships, at least one. 10 of those are, 9 of those are multi-time world champions. The one-time champions are Celium, Scump, Octane, TP, and Slasher. Obviously, TP has been retired for so long, so he's kind of an outlier in this conversation because he really hasn't played in like 7-8 years, where a lot of these other guys are more recently retired or obviously active. So he's kind of a weird case, but when you're part of literally the most dominant or maybe second most dominant dynasty in Call of Duty history, I think you have to be at least considered. And then obviously you talked about Slasher and Octane, those two players in particular. They have won world championship, but for so long they were considered to be two of the best AR players in the entire world. I would also say Formal is someone that I left off this list, but I thought maybe longevity, he might not have the case that some of the other players might, considering he played Halo for so long, like even into like Ghosts, I think was like his first year that he was like actually dedicated to competitive COD. But then like his peak is one of the greatest peaks in Call of Duty history. So you could easily make the case. I wonder what you think about maybe these 15 players that I named.
Yeah, I don't think Celium is there yet. That was the first one that jumped out to me when you were running off the list. Obviously, I'm really high on TP as a player, even as a coach. I just think he's an awesome Call of Duty mind. He's a great guy. I really like his content nowadays too. I don't think, especially he's got, like you said, the one ring. He's 7th all time in titles at 16. Um, I just don't think. I think some of these other players with 2 rings probably puts them over the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for top 10 consideration. You want to put him in like a top 15. I can see that maybe, but I think Formal is like a shoe-in for top 10. I think a lot of people have him top 5, specifically at number 5.
Yeah.
I mean, he's 4th all time with 23 titles, so it's kind of hard to ignore that.
Yeah, that's probably an oversight on my part.
Yeah, so I think, you know, Formal's definitely in there somewhere. I think I'm gonna say it in no order because I know, like, especially the top 3, really, Crim, Scump, and Clay, that gets debated, and the big thing holding Scump back in some of these conversations is his only having 1 ring, and then Crim has 37 titles versus Scump having 30, Karma having 24. So, it's in no order. Crim, Scump, Karma. I think Clay has to be. So I mean, it's tough to say Clay over Formal, but Clay has the rings. Formal doesn't. Formal has more championships. So no order. I'm just gonna say no order because it's much easier. Crim, Scump, Karma, Formal, Clay, Aches. That's 6. So can't have that top 5. But those guys are all top 10 in some capacity. The order of where you want to put them. I think those 6 guys are like locked into any top 10 list. Some people probably don't want to put Aches on there out of just spite and not liking him and whatnot. But I mean, 6th all time in championships with 17. I'm pretty sure he like claims to have 20 championships or something too. So there might be some missing from the wiki or something like that. But he's got a lot of titles and got 2 rings, so he's up there. I think Simp and Abizi have to enter the conversation somewhere in that top 10, especially after the top 5 at this point right now. They can certainly only get higher in my eyes, just if they continue to find success. And then somebody like Kenny would hop in after that in like the 9-10 range. And I think the numbers back that up now, and the second ring really did a lot to help that. He's also something didn't even really mention when we're here. Some of these guys, I was rattling off the guys he was tied with, obviously like JCap, Octane. They're at 10 with 0 online titles. Simp and Abizi at 10, but with 3 online titles. Then some of these other names that Kenny passed with that 10th title and the second COD champs ring there. Big Timer, Enable, Parasite, and Slasher at 9. Priest at 9 with 1 online win. Arcides at 9 with 3 online rings. And then John, Nadeshot, and Rainbow at 8, along with Attach and Celium at 8 with a couple onlines, and Apathy, Slacked, Zuma at 7. Um, so this title really did a lot for Kenny in my eyes and his stock and his overall legacy. Shotzi also was part of that conversation last week. He's at 6 championships right now in COD. Obviously, he's got 3 world championships. You count the Halo one, but that's a different conversation than what we're having right now. The other thing too, you look at overall tournament earnings in Call of Duty, and obviously this is something that has to be weighed with the other element. Like we talk about the format changing, and being something that can impact where some of these veterans are placed over current players just because they played in more tournaments, so they had a chance to win more tournaments. They were also playing in more tournaments that had lower prize pools. And nowadays, prize pools are much bigger. And Kenny is already 7th all time in major tournament winnings with $1,150,000 earned. He's roughly $5,000 earned behind Clay for 6th all time. And in 8th all-time earning is Scump at 992K. I think that's only from COD tournaments, so like it wouldn't count Scump's Warzone earnings, I don't believe. But I remember, not too long ago when, because you and I worked pretty closely on the earnings article that we used to update every year for Dot, and there was a time where it was kind of like we were having a couple players listed, and I can't remember, was it who would have been the first? It must have been Krim was the first to hit a million earned. I just remember there was a stretch where it was like we were updating and like a couple people are hitting a million, and now we got 7 players at over $1 million earned. We have 2 guys, Simp and Abizi, who are over 1.6 million earned, and they're now all time earned leaders. Abizi slightly ahead of Simp. Notably, the one thing that people always forget, I don't know, I might overstate how often people forget this, but I feel like it is often forgotten in the Simp and Abizi conversation, is that Abizi was a part of the initial E United team in Black Ops 4 with JCap, Clay, Arcides, and Pristini, and they made the grand finals of the first event, which I believe was Vegas in Black Ops 4, and they lost to OpTic in the finals. So Abizi has an extra finals appearance over Simp in their careers just because Simp wasn't 18 yet. He joins United later in that year, and they obviously win a couple championships in the COD championship. Yeah. But that's where the difference comes most likely in their earnings. I think Abizi had like a COD champs appearance with E6 the year before too, or something like that, but I don't think they placed in the money, so that might not impact it. But I mean, the money nowadays that's something for anybody doing these top 10 lists and whatnot, is how do you value like the amount of money some of these newer players are earning versus the larger number of championships that some of these older players might have. And then when there's a cross section there between these newer players having a lot of money earned and matching the titles of some of these veterans, like Kenny is doing now, matching the titles of guys like JCap, Octane, and surpassing some of them in money earned, I feel like it has to be that this is going to be an evolving conversation now going forward, and just assuming that we have some different COD champs winners over the years. Obviously, if someone just starts running, like, I mean, let's say Kenny just wins the next 5 world championships, then we're going to be having a different conversation. But barring something like one team just running away with champs for the foreseeable future consecutively, this is going to be an evolving conversation.
Yeah, I want to make it clear, like with that kind of conversation about, okay, how much are they winning? Let me put it this way. Big Timer was in the Guinness Book of World Records in 2013 for being the highest earning Call of Duty player of all time to that point. He is not even probably in the top 20, top 30 now. Like he is, because he never, I guess he did win COD XP, but he didn't, win a world championship since Champs has become an annual thing. Big Timer.
Big Timer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like he won a lot in that one event, and obviously he was one of the best players and on one of the best teams, early on, like in competitive Call of Duty. But like he's not even close. Like we started that list. That was probably right after World War II champs, I believe. So that would have been like 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago maybe. And Big Timer's never been on that list, or maybe he was like really early on in that list. But like he hasn't been on that list in a long time. And that just kind of shows that. And he has, I think it's 9 championships. He's won 9 events in his career. Yep. And he's been retired since Ghosts. Like but that's to show like that the money is kind of crazy in a good way for nowadays, and it does make up for the fact that there are fewer events. Like it's a much more closed off system now than it ever has been before, because you only have really, like they had 5 events right this season. They had 4 majors and champs. Yeah. That's it, like for the CDL players at least. And before, teams were playing more than a dozen tournaments in a year. They were kind of flying all over the world, going to Europe, going to Australia, flying all around Canada and the United States to play in tournaments. So like the things are just different. And I think that is a big like point of conversation when we talk about these top 10 lists, because how do you rank Big Timer all time? Because like his peak was like before I even started watching. Obviously I was a huge Big Timer fan, but like he was like OpTic wasn't the powerhouse that it was in terms of actually winning events when I started watching. Like they were a competitive team, but they weren't winning all the time like they eventually would when they had the dynasty. But like his legacy is like kind of built before Black Ops 2 essentially. Even JCap, like part of his legacy is tied to what happened before Call of Duty esports really blew up. So how do you kind of like put that into perspective when there wasn't world championships? Obviously you had national championships, but like it's a different thing. Like we talked about it off air, like you can't really compare the two. They're two different things. Like a national championship is its own thing. It's not equivalent. It's not the same as a world championship. And I just find these kind of conversations really interesting, simply because it's very difficult to compare the two. And we have this argument in traditional sports all the time as well. Like, an NBA title in like Bill Russell's time in the 1960s it was a lot, I would say for him, was a lot easier to win than now. Like this year it was a probably more difficult title. Well, maybe not the Celtics this season because that's a different conversation, but generally winning an NBA championship in a team of in a league of 30 teams is more difficult than winning it in a league of 8 to 12 teams. And that could be the same, like the argument against the CDL is that it only takes 3 wins or 4 wins to win a world championship now, where you would in the past have to play through group play and then a massive bracket to win a world championship. It was almost like an endurance event to win. So, just a roundabout way of saying like the way to compare these things are very difficult. There's no real definitive way to compare eras in games and how players performed in each era, because things have changed so much in the last, I've been following it for 11 and a half years, you even longer than that, and it's changed a lot in the last decade or even less than that because we had the CDL.
Just one thing too that I was looking while you were talking at the money breakdown, and something jumped out to me that I just want to share because I thought it was funny. The COD Wiki, obviously shout out COD Esports Wiki for everything they've done for the scene over the years and still continue to do. If you look at the major tournament earnings, obviously we were talking about like Kenny not having an online title when they have it separated for tournament wins here for total and online. That obviously plays a factor in his earnings, where he only has $85,000 earned online. So that means he has over $1 million earned just on land, not even considering online earnings. And a lot of these guys, like Simp and Abizi, have $346,000 earned online. A lot of these guys in the top 10 have over 300K. The only ones who don't, Slasher in 10th, who is 10th overall in tournament earnings at 984,000. He's only got 75,000 in online earnings. And then in 13th place, Octane has earned he did earn $871,000 in his career, 4,500 online. We've talked about the struggles of some of his teams with Seattle and whatnot online, and I just thought that was really funny because looking at some of these numbers in the right column, it's not the lowest because JCap has 0 according to this, and Karma has only 2,000. They're below Octane in overall earn, but I just thought that was pretty funny while I was looking at that.
Yeah, shout out the Seattle Surge and the pandemic era CDL where we had champs virtual. It was I think it was the biggest champs in terms of prize pool, and it happened online. I think it was 4.6 million. That number sticks with me, and I think it was that, if I'm not mistaken, which is a crazy amount of money to just be giving out online. I'm gonna have to look it up real quick, but what I did kind of a little bit earlier was, I think the top 18 or top 8 players, or it's not necessarily top 8, but 8 players that probably should be in the top 10: Scump, Formal, JCap, Simp, Karma, Crim, Clay, Aches. Those 8 players, would you agree, are like probably definitive top 10 players?
Say it again.
Scump, Formal, JCap, Simp, Karma, Crim, Clay, Aches.
So Noah Beasy?
I was just saying, like, I was just thinking, if we had to separate these two, I would obviously give the edge to Simp, simply because he has more individual accomplishments, and if I had to pick one, like, I would always go with Simp. But, like, yeah, he would probably be the 9th player. Like, he would probably be wherever Simp is, -1. And that's probably where I would put him. But then you would have Shotzi, Kenny. If you want to put Octane, Slasher, those are like the players that would be competing for that 10th spot, or, a spot in that top 10.
It's tough for me to see without having it written down. But I mean, yeah, just looking at these overall titles and whatnot: Crim, Scump, Karma, Formal, Clay, Aches. I didn't even mention JCap, which is bad on my part there. When I was like rattling those 8 names off earlier, but I was saying Crim, Scump, Karma, Formal, Clay, Aches, JCap, Simpa, Beasy, Kenny. I believe that's 9 guys right there. 9 of the top 10. If those guys are in your top 10, I agree. No matter what the order is and whatnot, I think that makes sense to me.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm just to circle back to the overall question, the idea of this segment. Kenny, very easily could be a top 10 player. I think he's kind of on the edge, like in the 8 to 10 area. Yes. And that can very easily change over the next year as well. Same with Shotzi, because he's probably right on the edge as well. I think a little bit farther back than Kenny is, but another good season, another world championship, obviously, that really adds a lot. But yeah, I did look it up. 2020 champs, $4.6 million total prize pool. Wow. The Dallas Empire won a $1.5 million grand prize.
It was 5v5 too.
Yeah, so it was splitting a little bit, and then FaZe, they got 900 grand for coming in second. And Seattle Surge, they were one of 2 teams at that event not to get any prize money, so holding true to Octane. But yeah, I love these conversations. I'm sure we'll have more of them as time goes on. Maybe Esports World Cup. People are saying maybe a second champs of the year. Who knows? in terms of money, it is comparable.
It's gonna have an impact on that winnings table that we've been talking about here now.
But the Esports World Cup is coming up in just 2 weeks, or a little bit over 2 weeks. 5 CDL teams are not competing under their franchise name. Let's talk real quick as we're talking about this. Let's just talk about the New York Subliners, because they won the World Championship last year. They were very close to winning back-to-back World Championships this year. They won the final major of the 2024 CDL season, but it appears now that the New York Subliners brand is dead and kind of buried or thrown off to the side, and that the team formerly known as NYSL will be under the Cloud9 brand. That's something that we had kind of talked about, I think, probably about a month ago now, or maybe a little bit less, when C9 announced that they had acquired the Subliners, and we weren't quite sure what that meant. Obviously, I think at the time, Jack, or maybe it was just C9 Twitter account, they had said that the NYSL roster would be wearing C9 jerseys at the Esports World Cup. But now it seems like they are just going to be Cloud9, that it is the C9 Call of Duty team, which, I mean, we talked about it many times before on this podcast. I'm a big fan. Like, not of C9, I don't really care about that, but I'm a big fan of reverting to the esports organization's names. I'm a big proponent of LAT becoming 100 Thieves. I'm cool with Miami Heretics just dropping their Miami and becoming Heretics and joining up with their brand, and all of the others. And now we have G2 in the league. We have all of these other, obviously, if OpTic just wanted to be OpTic Texas wanted to be OpTic, I think that would be cool. What do you think about this? And obviously this isn't, we haven't gotten like great like confirmation on like exactly what the future is, but it definitely is going to be C9 at the Esports World Cup.
Yeah, so that's the initial news, I believe, was, let me just scroll up here, on July 25th now, and it was really, the Subliners put out like a 4-minute video on Twitter, just like kind of recapping the teams they've had, going with a video showing some of the players they've had over the years. And Jacob Hale is the one who quote tweeted it saying New York Subliners is no more. And I feel like that got the ball rolling a little bit on people, like, talking about, does this mean like, the brand's just retired now or whatnot? And obviously it seems like that's the direction it's potentially going in now. We won't know for sure. Is this going to be a thing where, like, 100 Thieves becomes LA Thieves? Is now Cloud9 going to be allowed to become New York C9 or something that's not just
I'll lose
Cloud9?
My mind.
But yeah, that'll be interesting, and that's a bridge we can cross later on down the road. For now, for Esports World Cup, though, the big thing is, as you mentioned, is there are 5 teams at this event not competing under their CDL or their franchising name, including OpTic, Texas going as OpTic Gaming. Did I count Cloud9 in this? Let's see. So yeah, I guess that does count. So Cloud9 for New York, obviously. G2 Esports for Minnesota Rocker. That was part of that like partnership / merger earlier before this season. Team Heretics is going as Team Heretics and not Miami Heretics. And is that
there's actually 6?
There are 6.
Yeah.
And then 100 Thieves for LA Thieves. Yeah.
Yep.
So 1, 2, 3, 4. Which one am I missing?
So OpTic Gaming, Cloud9, G2 Esports, Team Heretics, 100 Thieves. Oh, and I was mistaken. It is 5. I was, for some reason, I think Atlanta FaZe. Maybe I just don't see the FaZe logo.
That's the one I was surprised about. So that's like we have some of these teams going as their CDL brands, and it makes sense for like Vegas Legion. I guess Carolina Royal Ravens could go as like what is it Rect Global? Is that the partnership? Or am I getting that wrong, or I don't remember exactly, to be honest.
I don't remember exactly what it is, but yeah, that sounds right.
And then Atlanta is the one for me that was surprising. Like all these other teams, if Atlanta FaZe wanted to go as just FaZe Clan, that wouldn't have surprised me. But there's always been that, like, I feel like when Atlanta FaZe became a thing, it was like it's not owned by Just FaZe. It's owned by like that Atlanta Esports Ventures AEV
Oh, that's a good point,
group.
actually.
And yeah, like they made like a deal for
It,
the naming rights or something like
yeah, it's a
that. So
joint
that's
venture.
probably, yeah. So that's where that's probably happening. And then same with like Toronto Ultra, they could go as, I guess they could go as Splice if they really wanted, or like Mad
Yes.
Lions, whatever they
Yes, Splice.
yeah. But I forgot what we were talking about.
But we
Before
could,
went on this.
if all of these CDL teams had went after or went under their brands, like their organization brands, obviously we'd have OpTic. Vegas, I don't think that the owners actually have like an esports brand. So there's that. Carolina, I think it would be Rogue that they would go under. Then there's
Rec Global. I was just looking at it.
yeah, and I think Rect owns Rogue or did own Rogue.
I don't. I'm getting them mixed up with the LEC. Like there's been so many.
Then there's
splits of-
obviously C9. Seattle Surge would be Luminosity, which has a long storied history with Call of Duty. Then there's G2. Toronto, like you said, could go under Splice, which has been retired for a few years, but obviously has a pretty good history with Call of Duty, and I love that logo so much, and I hope for it to come back. But they're also one of those teams where I could see them sticking with the Ultra because they've just kind of built that brand, and they have a pretty good like name recognition within COD. Then there's obviously Heretics. That one's pretty, same. Although I might like their logo better in the CDL than this one.
Yeah. We got off track though. We were talking about New York and Cloud9, and I was using that. So segue here was we were talking about them announcing potentially the rebrand or whatnot. I forget exactly how you worded your initial question, but I was using that to talk about this. So that process that happened on July 25th, I was talking to my buddy Rule, who's a big C9 fan, especially for League of Legends, and he was the one who said to me, get rid of the city names and just let them be C9. I said to him that I would be upset if there's not another New York event, just because obviously there was that one event 2 years ago now, I think, when my buddy was getting married in Dominican, and obviously a New York event would be super close for me. I wanted to go to it, but it was when my buddy was getting married, so I couldn't go. But so that's what I was saying. I was like, I they get rid of the city, the New York aspect of Cloud9. They might not be incentivized to host an event, period, let alone in New York.
Because they didn't for a long time.
But then now we got the news that from C9 Jack saying that they're going to re-sign all of the players on. Oh, I didn't even see this. The new name is officially Cloud9 New York.
Oh, God, man.
So that was in his comment on the Reddit. Actually, so that's not from Jack. So that's from the guy who talked to Jack and posted it on the Reddit and saying the name is officially Cloud9 New York. So speculation there. I'm getting stuff mixed up here with the Reddit threads and whatnot. I'm looking at I'm just mixing up because I got too many links here, and I'm trying to scroll back in my conversation with Rule and where we were having and whatnot. But overall, just gonna try and wrap up this. We're not sure what's going on exactly with the CDL aspect of Cloud9. They're tied to New York. Their name going into 2025 season, all that. For now, we know that it's C9 at the Esports World Cup, and the most important thing that a lot of people potentially were speculating on and whatnot is that C9 is extending the contracts of the COD team. Jack's comment on the Reddit post, was I can tell you that we're taking the option to extend all contracts on our COD team. I'm thrilled to be back in COD and looking forward to sharing more about our branding soon.
Oh, no. That's not a good thing about sharing more about our branding soon, because it would just be the same if they didn't have to share anything. So I don't need NYC9 or C9NY, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't. Those guys don't live in New York. I think at one point they did, or there were like offices in New York. Maybe that was like pre-pandemic. But like all of these guys have been in Dallas for like 3-4 years now. Like, there's no point. Give it up. Like, no one cares that much. The New York fans are going to be fans of whoever they want, regardless of if they have the New York name next to it. I don't think it matters one bit. And like, I understand it. New York is obviously a really big market, the biggest market that you possibly could have. Like, so you're not going to just like give it up, but I don't think it adds a whole lot to Cloud9, who is already a global organization. They don't need a city name to kind of like modify it. That just my quarterly rant on this topic. But yeah, I don't think it's a good idea. But I'm glad that C9 is re-signing all of their players. That puts to bed the speculation that we had that maybe they would make a roster change, considering they won a world championship last year, then made a roster change in the offseason.
I won't go that far, because obviously they could sign these players. That's true, and actually. Then, make some kind of unnatural isn't the word I'm looking for, unexpected trade. They could technically sign Hydra and then trade him to another team. That would be a very controversial move that a lot of people would not like, and it would definitely be a hot topic that we would dive into for a while. But there's also the potential they extend these 4 guys and they sign another player, and then somebody moves to the bench or something. Yep. I think that's unlikely, but C9.
We've seen that in the past.
C9 is an organization too. This isn't like not to necessarily throw a shot at Vegas, but C9 isn't going to take the Vegas approach of not being willing to spend money. C9, that's what I was talking to Rule 2, and C9 in League of Legends famously, I think it was one of Jacob Wolf's like big reports at the time, like through like it was like in the 4 to 6 million range is what C9 paid Perks to come over from Europe to North America to compete. He only stayed for 1 year, so he didn't, whatever the full value of the deal was, I don't think he made that, but nonetheless, it was they were not shy about spending money in League of Legends. They haven't been in their history in League of Legends, and if especially based on Jack's message there on the Reddit, that if they're serious about sticking in Call of Duty and competing long term, wouldn't be the most ridiculous thing in the world to see them continue to spend money in COD too.
And also just a thing that some CDL teams have done in the past is that they extend these players or they pick up their option, and then they're like, well, you can look for a new team, but we have you under contract. So when your new team, whoever you end up going with, we're going to demand a buyout, and we're going to get something in return monetarily, so that you don't just walk for absolutely nothing, which is a smart business move. It obviously sucks for the players when that happens, where they have to try to find, I think Crimsix, even like when he went to New York, I think he had complained about it because I think maybe his contract was set up that he had to pay, like part of his contract was like kind of forfeited as a result of the buyout, which is just an insane thing to have your contract set up that way. But I remember him talking about like the way that it personally impacted him when he went, I believe, from OpTic to, or went from the Empire to New York. So there's always that possibility. But I tend to think that New York is going to have the same exact roster heading into next season. But like we talked about in the last episode, if FaZe makes a change, or Toronto or something along those lines, another top 4 team, then there's the possibility of those other top 4 teams making a change. I'd be pretty shocked if OpTic changed anything at all this offseason, but that's just it may happen. I don't know. But the Esports World Cup, so obviously we have these CDL teams. I think all but the Los Angeles Guerrillas are competing at the Esports World Cup. So there are 16 teams in total, 4 groups, 4 teams per group. Pretty interesting just to look at it. Obviously, there are a few challengers teams and some pretty good, talented players in this. But we kind of get to see some new rosters as well. So Group A, just real quick, OpTic, Vegas, Carolina, and Omit, Brooklyn. Group B, Cloud9, Seattle, G2, aka Minnesota, and Gentlemates. Group C, Toronto Ultra, Heretics, Boston Breach, Stallions, which is FC Black, In Group D, 100 Thieves, Atlanta FaZe, Team Falcons, and Lore Gaming. Obviously, we don't know crap from crap about the Challengers players. I think we're pretty open about that.
Whoa.
Okay, we don't know that much about the Challengers players, like that aren't the former CDL players.
Okay.
Like and we weren't following those CDL players very closely in Challengers this season either. So like we do know that like Lore, they won the World Championship or the Challengers Championship. Obviously, Arcides, Mr. 2.5 rings now.
Yes, sir.
And obviously like FC Black, which was pretty much like a minor league team this season, where anytime that they added a player to their roster, that player was like seemingly just picked up by a pro team immediately. But like that's ASIM, Brack, Exceed, Rex. Obviously Boston, they are going to look a little bit different from when we last saw them completely stinking it up in the CDL. So what are your overall thoughts as we go into the Esports World Cup? Obviously, it's a big money event. It's a weird timing for an event because this is technically the off season for the CDL, but I think a lot of teams are really going to take this seriously and really put their best foot forward.
Yeah, so I think just for the sake of running through it, so especially most of our listeners and whatnot should know the CDL rosters, so we're not going to go through those minus the ones that made some roster moves here, but we'll list off the challengers rosters too. So with Group A, obviously OpTic, we know Kenny, Shotzi, Pred, and Dashi. For Vegas is adding Fame from LAG in the place of Johnny. I didn't put his tweet in here. He tweeted something though.
He's dealing with an illness, right?
Yeah, something like that. So best wishes to Johnny, hoping for a speedy recovery out of him. Carolina, obviously we knew Clay wasn't going to be competing with Carolina, but they picked up Beans from Boston, who many people, especially towards the end of the year, were saying Beans was the best player on that bad Boston team. So Beans getting an opportunity here could be a big, for lack of a better word, a big opportunity for him to showcase his talent once again. And then omit Brooklyn is Prolute, Spart, Fire, and Hamza. I believe Prolute was playing with the team, the 3/4 of the guys who got picked up by Boston. So then he picks up 3/4 of Spart's team from Challengers to complete this team. So this is kind of like they don't necessarily competing as four together, don't have the most experience. So it could be tough having a first round matchup against the defending world champion OpTic Gaming, which we kind of breezed by it, but to have quote unquote OpTic Gaming competing in a COD tournament again is very cool and very nostalgic. Obviously had the whole Huntsman phase and OpTic Chicago, OpTic Texas and whatnot. So it's been a while since we saw OpTic Gaming, the original, competing in a COD
OGLA, the real OpTic, still in my mind.
So those are the rosters in Group A. Group B, Cloud9's New York, like we said. Seattle Surge, no changes for them there from what we saw at the end of the year. G2 has DiamondCon and Estriel from LAG in place of Standy and Gunless, so it's Accuracy, Lins, DiamondCon, and Estriel. And then Gentlemates, which is apparently Gotaga's org, which I did not know Gotaga owns an org, but yeah, for those who are unfamiliar with the name, Gotaga was basically like the European version of Nadeshot, and for at least in some semblance of it, he was a very popular figure back then, and back in the OG COD days, he was just very popular, and the fact he has an org, that's pretty cool if that is true, and
it is
whatnot,
true.
but so that's where I will say, not familiar with that stuff. But like when we say players right now, like Bance, Harry, Cobra, and Denza, obviously we all know Bance, and that's a name that should be familiar to some of our listeners too. The name here that stood out to me though is Cobra. I feel like I heard a little buzz around him, especially in the off season heading into this year, as a potential target for some of these other teams, and he was playing with Brezzy, Lins, and Abuza last year in Challengers Champs. So out of that team competing at Challengers Champs, Cobra was the only one to not compete in the CDL this last year. So this could be a big opportunity for him. Obviously, if I'm at least hearing the name, he's making some noise, and uh, competing on a big stage like this against some of these CDL teams could be a big opportunity for him to showcase his talent too. Um, in Group C, we were kind of alluding to it. Obviously, Toronto and Heretic, same rosters for them at the end of the CDL season. Boston, though, has Snoopy, and then they added Cammy, Awakening, and Purge. I think we've talked about that on the pod that was reported, and then Sensor kind of said it wasn't the case, but
and
obviously
Purge said it was done
now.
true too.
Yeah. And then Stallions, like you said, is the FC Black team. Apparently, obviously makes sense in terms of potential. What's the word I'm looking for? Competitive integrity to uphold competitive integrity, not having two phase teams.
Yeah.
So I believe Zuma is back in this or to some capacity with the Stallions name. And that's Asim, Brack, Exceed, and Rex. They were a really strong challengers team all year, like you said, having like a fourth guy seemingly getting picked to go to the CDL, and obviously Asim was in the CDL, made it back to Challengers, still saw success after that. So good opportunity for these guys to showcase their talent too. And then Group D, 100 Thieves, Atlanta FaZe, Falcons, and Lore. I'm gonna let you name off the Falcons roster because I really want to see you pronounce one of those players' names. But then Lore, like you said, is Arcity's two real Paul X and Yuli. We've seen these guys in the CDL, obviously Arcity's, but even those other guys have had a stint in the CDL here and there. So, yeah, those that should be other rosters. Go ahead with Falcons there for me.
So Roxas, Exnid, King Abodi. That one's pretty easy.
Yeah.
And then I would like, Elon Musk, like he named his kid like the little character. Like that's kind of what this is. So it's 5ALDX. I think it's probably Soldex because like
okay, you're saying S. For some reason the first thing that came to mind for me was bald.
I mean, it does kind of look like Bald X too.
Yeah,
we'll have to see. Is he
really makes more sense as an S than a B, but for some reason it just looked like bald to me. Like that was the first thing that came to mind.
Well, if this man shows up and he is follically challenged, we will know what's the deal here.
I got that circled though. That whatever that name is, 5ALDX. I am excited to see how that is pronounced on broadcast, and also we get to see Atlanta FaZe versus Falcons in the first round of this group play. If that is not a 3-0 absolute smackdown by FaZe, I am going to be shocked. No disrespect to these players, obviously. They're Middle East Asia, MENA,
yeah,
is it MEA something?
Yeah,
qualifier?
Middle East North Africa team. They're like based out of
this
is the Saudi.
This is MEA. It says so.
Yeah.
Just Middle East Asia. Obviously, those names are not familiar to CDL fans, most likely anyone. So, don't want to disrespect those guys, and I don't want to sound like a broken record here saying it's a big opportunity, but especially for these guys, if they have aspirations of being a professional Call of Duty player someday, this is a massive opportunity for them. Arguably more so than any of these other players. This is just their shot to get their name out there, right? If anyone on this team comes out and drops like 30 kills map 1 against Atlanta FaZe, that's like instant eye-opening moment for that guy. So, I still fully expect Atlanta FaZe to take care of business against these guys, and I will be very surprised if it's not a 3-0, just absolute 20-minute smackdown. But I also, again, am not well versed in this team and its players, so I don't want to totally disrespect them. And anything can happen on any day at Call of Duty.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like old school COD champs where like complexity rolls through, right, and they're playing Tainted Minds and they're playing Killer Fish in the first round of champs, and it's like 250 to 38 on raid, and it's like, okay, yeah, like let's keep it moving here. I mean, these guys, like, so they're like the only Saudi team here. Obviously, Esports World Cup is taking place in Saudi Arabia. I mean, we'll see how it is. Like, we don't really get to see a lot of regions like get representation. Like, you actually have to make it to the CDL to get that kind of opportunity. So like you said, this is like a big chance for these players, and obviously for the challengers players too. Like, even if they're NA based, like, they don't play against CDL talent unless it's in scrims, and people don't get to see that on the outside. Maybe CDL teams are like, holy crap, like, that kid's really good in scrims, but the fans don't actually get to see that. So we'll get to experience some of that. I think it's going to be interesting. I do think another interesting part about this is the rules that are being instituted for the Esports World Cup. I don't know if we'll see any Draza scrappy beef in the desert here. I hope not, for their sakes, because the rule book stipulates that all participants must at all times observe the highest standards of personal integrity and good sportsmanship. They are required to behave in a professional and sportsmanlike manner in their interactions with other participants and teams, and they shall not use obscene or offensive gestures or profanity in their tags, player handles, team branding, game chat, live play communications, lobby chat, shoulder content, interviews, or other public-facing communications. I don't really care about any of that stuff. It's the live play communications that I'm very worried for every single player here at this event.
All I'll say is I do not have a copy of the CDL rule book readily available to me. I would be very surprised if there wasn't similar language in the CDL rulebook to some extent.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't know how far it would take it, but we have heard over the years about players getting fined and stuff.
Octane.
So it is likely in their contracts or the rulebook somewhere. You can't do this stuff or you'll get fined, and players get fined. So it might not be all doom and gloom for this. I would just, if it's a little more dialed back for this event being in Saudi Arabia than, some other events, I wouldn't be surprised, though.
That is my concern, is that this is a different country, and a different country in multiple different ways. I don't think we need to go into it, but just the idea that, like, people should be careful. Like, and, like, this is obviously a big event, but this isn't a CDL event. So this isn't an Activision thing where, they're a publicly traded company, like multi-billion-dollar like entity or corporation. Like, this is Saudi Arabia. Like, let's be careful. I hope everybody has like a fun and safe time. But someone said that Scrappy is 100% getting arrested on day one. So I just love it. Like, obviously the CDL, they do have those rules. Specifically more, I think, with like social media stuff. Like, they really, in the past, have not been big fans of players expressing their disapproval of the game, I will say, on social media. And that has resulted, I think Octane said that he was the most heavily fined player in Call of Duty League history, which makes sense based on some of the things he said over the years. But they have been a lot more lax over the last like year or two. Even like on the broadcast, like, it's obvious that the CDL has started to lean more into the drama and like the shit talk, for lack of a better term. Like, they love that stuff, and so do we. That's something that I think both of us have agreed on for a long time, that it's a part of competitive gaming in general, but specifically with FPS games like Halo, Gears of War, and Call of Duty are so based in that kind of trash talk that we should embrace it and make it a part of like who we are. So I love that it is a part of what the CDL has kind of become over the last year. Obviously, like, it went so far that something personal between Draza and Scrappy was referenced on the broadcast by showing their respective girlfriends. Like, that's an insane thing that the CDL broadcast was like, yeah, sounds good to me, bro. Like, I'm kind of baffled by that still, and it happened like over a week ago. But now we have this Esports World Cup, and players should just realize like it's a little bit different, and maybe we should be a little more cautious for just the 3 days that we're here, so we can go home. But yeah, it should be a fun event. I mean, it's, I think, almost the same prize pool as champs. Obviously, there are more teams, so a little more unpredictability. It's in the off season. Some of the, the challengers teams haven't played the pro teams on this kind of stage, and vice versa. So you don't really know how it's going to go. We've had the pro-ams before, and sometimes we get those interesting results. And usually the lower level CDL teams seem to struggle the most. And it looks really bad for the CDL teams when they lose to a challengers team, considering, one of these teams can't get into the CDL and another, we saw it with LAG, I think last year, where they replaced like pretty much their whole roster after they did poorly at the opening event. So I don't know if that'll happen this year, but there's a chance that a lot of roster changes will be happening because of this event, or, not happening because we did really well at the Esports World Cup. It'll be interesting.
The other thing, I didn't write it down in the notes, I did want to mention, obviously with the event in Saudi Arabia, there's going to be a time difference for viewers in the US in particular. Looking just on Google, according to Google, it's 6:18 a.m. in Saudi Arabia right now.
So 7-hour difference
for Eastern time, 7-hour difference. And I didn't see a schedule on Twitter with like the group announcements or whatnot, but according to the CoD Esports Wiki, OpTic is playing that Omit Brooklyn team, and Vegas is playing Carolina at 8 a.m. Eastern on August 15th. So obviously that could, the exact time could be subject to change, but just as a general reference, it's going to be a little different time zone wise than what we had this past year with a lot of the CDL events and, being hosted in the US and whatnot.
Yeah, it's gross. You should always be on Eastern time zone, best time zone. Even though Saudi Arabia has kind of moved that around when they do their boxing events, though, like the UFC just did this in London where they didn't start the main event until like 5 a.m. local time in London. So they could cater to the American fans and their time. And Saudi Arabia did the same thing with, I think, the Ngannou versus Fury boxing match. They didn't start until like 5 a.m. local time. And I don't think that they should do that for the CDL. I don't think or for COD fans. We're not that important. I don't think we need to torture these players by making them play all throughout the morning. So, but yeah, I'm interested. I will be watching. Obviously we have 2 weeks, 3 weeks almost before we get to that. So maybe we'll do an episode before then. Maybe we'll do a few predictions. Maybe you can get some revenge for the pick'em, and we'll do an Esports World Cup centric pick'em.
It'll have to be separate.
Yeah,
I'm count that for this season. That's not no.
But yeah, I think that about does it. I don't really think like there's, obviously this is the post champs kind of come down. People are trying to get back and just figuring out what's going to happen over the next few weeks or few months. I did see some complaining about OpTic hosting champs and all of that. I think that was more like a backlash to OpTic winning champs. Like obviously it wouldn't have been brought up if they didn't do very well. But I don't think it had much of an effect, like in all honesty. OpTic has fans no matter where they go.
Yep. And
if this was in LA, like no one would be talking about like, oh, LAT and LAG hosted this event. Like nobody.
That happened for LAT's.
Yeah.
Champs. They didn't actually host it, but it was champs in LA and the Thieves won.
And I don't remember people talking about this as like a talking point. Like if this was in Antarctica, I think OpTic would still have the most fans out of anyone, and like they have the home field advantage no matter what. And I think it was probably a good thing. Like this event went off really well. The arena looked awesome. The setup was amazing. Probably the best champ setup that we've had in like maybe ever, like in terms of the actual stage facing towards each other at the very center of the arena. Like we don't really get that. Like the only thing I can think of, and I'm pretty sure it was on a side stage, it wasn't even main stage. It reminded me of the C9 OpTic game from Black Ops 3, where Lacefield got up famously after C9 upset and eliminated OpTic. I don't think that was on the main stage, or
So I was at that champs and they had like three. I think the state like it wasn't on the main stage because the main stage was in the big area and it was in the stadium. What's the stadium in Inglewood? I can't think of the name of it.
The Forum.
The Forum, yes, thank you. So like they had that. The main stage was actually elevated. The players were like 10, 15 feet in the air.
Yeah.
On that main stage, and then to the side, it was like to the right of that. There were the three stations, and I remember that OpTic C9 was in the middle one with the two on the side. So yeah, that was obviously I was at that event. That was a cool one.
Yeah, but this was a cool event to just look at, and it fosters that kind of trash talk where players are standing up, they can see their opponents like directly across, and they can yell obscenities and they can do whatever they want, the things that they can't do at the Esports World Cup, basically. And I think that was a big part of it. And obviously just the fans surrounding every part of the stage, all of the players, that added to the intensity. I'm sure if you ask any of the players, they would say that this is one of the best setups. It should be the standard bearer for all CDL events in the future, that kind of setup.
I will say, specifically referring to that facing the teams facing each other, it became a talking point with the Major Four this year because there was no fans at the event, and it was set up as kind of like a cage match. And literally for the finals, when New York was playing in the finals, they like did like the entrances and they locked the cage around, and that was pretty cool. I don't even like the wrestling or WWE or anything like that, but I'm assuming that's what like that was kind of like trying to embrace with that, but. The conversation kind of started there, and I think with champs now, regardless of all this other conversation about OpTic hosting and advantage this, blah blah blah, just that single aspect of the teams facing each other now, I think that has to be, especially going into 2025. I want to see every single event have that setup where players are facing each other. That's just so cool. It does lead to those moments like you were saying where you get that direct trash talk. I'm literally, if I was playing you and I just 360 spit on, turn on you for the win in round 11.
Yes, we're dreaming again.
I'm in your face screaming at you. You can't like if we're side by side, I have to like turn kind of like, I tweeted for this, the Scump informal moment for Huntsman versus Empire to kick off the CDL era. They had to turn and like point it at Krim and those guys over there. They and those guys on the Empire didn't have to actually look at them. But like if that moment was they're facing each other, the only way you're not seeing that is if you're looking down at the ground or like you're turning around or completely like trying to avoid it. If you're side by side and you're just looking straight ahead, you don't have to see the trash talk coming from the side. So I think that's just that setup. Really, that's for me. I want to see that going forward at every event. Just that single aspect of the players facing each other, and I think that's gonna be really cool to see if it actually is embraced going forward.
It's something that I kind of fell in love with. The CS:GO major, I think it was in Boston, like several years ago. This was maybe like 2017, 2018 when C9 won. It was in like a theater, and it was basically a circle. And the players were right in the middle of that circle, and it was kind of a little theater, but like that added to the intensity, especially because C9 was so popular. It was their NA's team, like the American fans were like super pumped. That kind of stuff I think adds a lot. And obviously you can't run, or probably they're not going to run all of the majors at big arenas like they did. I think this was like a 8,000 seat arena for champs. They're not going to do that for every single major, I would imagine, because of cost and whatnot. But if it's a small theater and you can stick, 500,000 fans, and they just sit around and watch these players like talk crap to each other, I think that's the best option. And it also goes back to the pit. The pit is where they are cramped right next to each other, like they're facing each other. I think that's the coolest setup. I remember going to MLG Columbus in 2013, and like you can get like pretty much right up next to a player as he's playing, and then he stands up and he completely obliterates verbally his opponent, like who's maybe 4 feet across the table. That kind of stuff is really cool and a part of COD, and should be a part of COD. So I hope to see more of it. I don't know what's going to happen at the Esports World Cup. I haven't been keeping up to date, like what they did for Warzone and some of the other events, but hopefully that'll be the case in Saudi Arabia. But But yeah, that does it for this week's episode. I think maybe we'll be back next week. I'm not completely sure. Obviously, it's the off season. Some of these, we won't have an episode every single week. But if you are interested in finding out when we do actually upload episodes, go to our YouTube channel. You subscribe to that, you will find all of our videos. I think we have over 100, obviously over 100 episodes, even more total videos. You can look us up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. Follow the podcast feed, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's the best way to keep up to date when we upload a new episode. You can also follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcast tours at Ego Chall Podcast. And we hope to see you sometime soon. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys for all support as always. I mean, just in the time that we went live from, a little over an hour ago to now, we just hit 140 subscribers on YouTube, so that's awesome. Thank you guys for the support. Like I said, obviously, last episode on YouTube and that snippet of the Kenny and Shotzi top 10 debate both did very well. So if there are like mini segments from any of these episodes we do going forward that you guys want to see in like a little breakdown or whatnot, feel free to let us know in the comments. We've been getting comments for a couple months now from you guys telling us how much you enjoy the pod and all that stuff. So thank you guys as always for all that support. We really do appreciate it. And yeah, obviously, like you said at the start, we're in a weird spot with the Esports World Cup, not really having the full blown off season yet. So there might be stuff to talk about next week. Might not be, but if there is, you'll know where to find us, and we'll be here when there is stuff to talk about. You can bet on that. So thank you guys as always, and remember to send the chow.